Somebody once said that books are kinder teachers than experience. Let's say that videos are kinder teachers than experience, and let's cover 6 mistakes that students often make when they're beginning the process of learning accounting. One of the most common mistakes is to use phrases and sentences instead of account titles. So students might put in invested cash instead of cash, or they might put in Steph put in capital instead of owner's capital here for the credit in this journal entry. So please be sure to use correct and specific account titles when creating our journal entries. A second mistake is to create journal entries that don't balance. We have to have the same amount of debits and credits. So if you go to a job interview and somebody asks you hypothetically what the journal entry might be sure to have the same amount of debits and the same amount of credits. If you get the account titles wrong, it just looks like you made a mistake. But if you have $10,000 worth of debits and $5,000 worth of credits, it looks like you never took accounting. Our third common error comes about when we go to create the trial balance. Remember, the first step in the accounting cycle is to analyze, 2, make a journal entry, 3, post, 4, create a trial balance. So if we had $10,000 worth of debits and $500 worth of credits in our cash account, what should go into the trial balance is $9,500 worth of cash. So the first line in our trial balance would have cash at $9,500. Sometimes students put $10,000 worth of debits and $500 worth of credits. Our trial balance is supposed to have one balance for each account as we go down. A fourth common mistake is to put revenue and expenses onto the balance sheet. Students get into a test situation and they kind of panic and they stick rent expense, interest expense, salaries and wages expense on the balance sheet. And that's not where they belong. Remember, the income statement is revenue minus expenses. And the balance sheet is what we own versus what we owe. Now, eventually, this revenue and these expenses will make it onto our balance sheet by way of being incorporated into owner's capital. Remember, owner's capital at the beginning plus net income minus drawings gives us owner's capital at the end. So that's how this stuff gets there, but you don't stick salaries and wages expense, salary, supplies expense, rent expense, insurance expense onto the balance sheet. A fifth and very common mistake is to put accumulated depreciation on the balance sheet as a liability. Students are trying to get their balance sheet to balance in the exam situation, and they take that credit balance for accumulated depreciation and they stick it on the right-hand side of the balance sheet. Remember that accumulated depreciation is a contra asset account. It hangs out with equipment or plant and offsets that debit balance of the equipment or the plant with a credit balance. It shows the world how much of the expense we have taken so far for that piece of equipment or that piece of property. Similarly, allowance for doubtful accounts, which we'll talk about later, is a contra asset account that offsets the balance of accounts receivable. Those two accounts have credit balances, but they aren't over here. They're on the left-hand side of the balance sheet. And lastly, sometimes students forget to put account titles on the financial statements. What do I mean by that? Sometimes in an exam situation, they'll just list all these numbers here. They'll just list all these numbers here and all these numbers here without any words next to them. Can you imagine trying to decide whether you should invest in Coca-Cola and you open up their annual report and all you see is billions of dollars listed with no explanation of whether they're sales or expenses, whether it's a cash balance or a liability account balance? So when you're creating your financial statements, please be sure to not only put a title at the top, but also to list the account titles next to the dollar amounts. Okay, I know that we're supposed to learn from our mistakes, but nobody says we can't learn from somebody else's mistakes. So hopefully those 6 missteps are missteps that you can avoid making. All right, hope that helps.